Hello and welcome to Terrain Oddity. My name is Jay and today we're going to be looking at basing materials that don't require tools or power tools. So the basic tool that I'm talking about that we will be looking at using is the simple knife, a Stanley knife in this case, or even a pair of scissors. Because I don't like terrain which requires you to use like saws or even to go further than that, like proper power tools or, you know, electric tools that in workshops, that kind of thing. We don't want to look at that. We don't want to factor that in mind. We're going to look at things that we can cut with knives or even simpler than that. This is E-PVC. We're going to talk about this. This is vinyl tile. We're going to talk about that. We've got little like MDF here, 3mm MDF, foam board in the back. And what we're going to do is we're going to talk through what terrain material is best, or I believe like most fitting for your project. So what do I mean? So you'll have something like this, like our previous terrain tutorial I've made. This area terrain, it's just rocks stuck to a base, and the base is made out of the E-PVC material. That kind of stuff, you could obviously put buildings on it. Trees, we can have these little discs that I was talking about. We've got trees, all kinds of reasons why you will put terrain on bases. There's reasons to not put some terrain on bases, for example, like actual buildings. Sometimes you don't really need the base. That's a conversation for like a different video, not this one. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through and talk about like what each one's good for. Mainly because on my videos, I use this. And this is what I'm going to recommend for everybody to use because it's my favorite. It's 3mm E-PVC. At the end of this video, I will sit at my computer and I'll show you where I bought these from and what it actually looks like. And yeah, it's my favorite. I bought, I'm going to quickly grab these A3 sheets. That's a plastic covering on the back to protect it because it's normally used for sign making. I bought 5 of these for £15. So it is possibly the most expensive one here, but as we'll show, I think it's the best. So we're looking at E-PVC here. It's plastic. It bends, but this is 3mm. So because it bends like this, you would not want to put like a massive building on it. Let me grab something heavy and show you what I mean. If I put this on one side and I pick it up, it flops, basically. Can you see that? Don't know if you can because of the angle of the camera, but essentially it flops. So if you had a big building on there and you picked it up by the edges, there's a chance that it would, you know, bend and destroy the terrain. So I wouldn't recommend it for something very, very large. But as I just showed, that piece that we were just looking at, this was made out of the E-PVC. This is literally E-PVC with the box glued on it and the sand glued on it, etc. Now, what I'm going to quickly do though is just turn on a light so we can see that a little bit better. This is perfect. I love this material. There are a couple of things that it does very well. Mainly, we can cut it with the blade. Now this is very, very easy to cut, but I am doing a bit of a silly angle, so just bear with me a second. Just take the full blade, extend it, and I'm just going to cut a line, 1 pass, 2 pass, and it's done. So I did that in 2 passes. Very, very simple to cut. Now, to the extent that if you're very careful, I actually can cut this with some scissors. I don't recommend this as I have trapped my finger in the blade before. So I would strongly suggest you are careful with it. But if you are careful with it, you can actually cut this with a very strong pair of scissors. Do be careful because like when you get through, it's very easy to like trap your fingers and stuff like that. However, I have used scissors when rushing. So all you would do if you're using this, you'd draw it what the size of the terrain you wanted and cut it out. And it's perfect. It's honestly, it's not going to warp under really any circumstances. The only problem is, as I said, if you had something heavy, it would potentially bend. But once you glue something to it, like this is just sand and rocks, really, that's not going to bend, especially on something that size. And here I have actually used sculptor mold, and that is definitely pretty much rock solid. Apart from the cost, the one main downside to this E-PVC is that it is made out of plastic. Now, if you're going to glue something like super glue, absolutely very, very, very strong bond. I'm not sure about other kinds of glues, but filler will work perfectly, all that kind of stuff. But what sometimes can happen if you're going to glue straight PVA and sand onto this, it is a little hydrophobic. So I've got a little bit of water with a little bit of black paint in it, and I'm just going to show you what I mean. Now, this isn't unusual because it's just water, but you can see it's, you know, it's not going to soak into this material. It just stays on the surface. I'm using the term hydrophobic. I don't really know if that's true, but if that was PVA, your PVA will do the same thing. It'll, and I'll just turn the light off a little bit so we can possibly see that a little bit better. Your PVA will do the same thing in that it won't absorb into the material. It'll literally just possibly wipe off, and you'll end up with streaky sand bits. But that's not necessarily a massive problem. What can happen is that you'll end up with little gaps missing in your sand. It's not really a huge issue if you're going to cover it with flock. You can just go back over it a second time and fill in the gaps. Or you can obviously just take care while you're putting your initial layer of PVA on it. But once it's glued to the base, it's like gluing sand to your model bases, like your GW style plastic bases, in that if you really wanted, you can sometimes peel off the sand in like a clump as the PVA is glued to it. Now in this case, I don't think it's never really been a problem. If you really tried, you might notice a lack of adherence to it, but in this case it's worked perfectly. If you're worried about that, you can put a layer of filler down or spackle, and honestly that'll go away. It'll then absorb, the PVA will then absorb into the filler instead. But in this case, I've literally just glued sand straight onto this kind of base and had no issues. So it's definitely possible. It is a slight concern, and really the hydrophobic nature of this is the only concern apart from cost. For me, this material is so good just because you can cut it so easily and it's not going to warp any kind of way, because it's plastic. Basically, plastic's not going to absorb, because the liquid's not going to absorb into it. It's really not going to warp. So let's jump to the next one, and this is 3 Mill Mdf. Now there's different kinds of woods, there's fiberboard and all that kind of stuff. I don't really know too much about them. Some of I know Mel had a video, the terrain shooter, on cake bases, which is very thick, and unless you're going to put like a massive hill on it, I just think it will look ugly. But 3 Mill Mdf or 6 Mill Mdf is fine for terrain. Obviously the thinner the better, in the sense that it'll blend in more with the board, but sometimes that's not a concern. However, it is reasonably difficult to cut. Now, I don't know if fiberboard's easier or anything like that, or chipboard, but this is 3 Mill Mdf, and you can cut it with a knife. 6 Mill Mdf you probably can cut with a knife, but it's very difficult. You can obviously cut it with a saw, but what I never actually spoke about with this stuff, it's very easy to do curves. It's very easy to do curves. You literally just get your knife and just curve it as you cut. It's very difficult with this stuff because it requires so many passes that to get the curve is just a pain in the bum. So that's one pass, 2 passes. I'm probably going to just speed this up and we'll talk about how many passes it takes. So at 7, it was pretty much coming off. At 8, it essentially is off. I haven't done that particularly well, but you know, it doesn't really matter. For all of these, you would then bevel the edges, fine. But you know, 7, 8 passes to try and cut 3 Mill Mdf with a Stanley knife, it's just a lot of faff. It is reasonably cheap. You can go to a DIY store and get a lot of MDF for, you know, 10 quid, something like that. You'd have quite a lot of it. These discs are very easy to obtain, and they're quite good for trees. So I showed you maybe at the start. This is my tree base. This is essentially just made out of MDF. 3 Mill Mdf. It's not necessarily pretty or what have you, but very cheap. I think you can get like 50 of these for approximately £5 off eBay, something like that. Now you can get discs of the E-PVC material, it's just a lot more expensive. All in all, MDF is actually a reasonable material. It just doesn't cut well with a knife, which is the whole purpose of this and the whole reason I like the E-PVC. It does absorb water quite well. I wonder if I can actually show you that. It absorbs paint and stuff quite well. This doesn't really show it. It's sort of having a very similar effect, but maybe a little bit it shows that it absorbs it, which is both good and bad. The absorption means that things are going to glue to it really easily using PVA. The bad side of that is MDF is perhaps a little bit more prone to warping than the plastic. If you are going to worry about warping, what you generally want to do is you want to have your terrain in like rounded shapes rather than say long and narrow shapes. But MDF, if you've got, like, you can see how that has quite clearly absorbed that, whereas this, with the difference, is it's still on here, and I could literally wipe that off. So yeah, definitely it absorbs the moisture, whereas the E-PVC doesn't. And it's just a bit awkward to cut, however it is cheap. The third material we're going to look at is foam board. Obviously, normally you get this in massive sheets. You can get it from hobby stores very easily. It's very, very easy to obtain. MDF you can get from hobby store, DIY shops. The E-PVC is a little bit more specialised. Obviously don't ignore the water, it does mean this is going to get wet, but it's not really a problem. This stuff very easy to obtain. Hobby shops, craft shops, all that kind of stuff will have it. The downside to it is because it's card, very, very warpable. It'll warp very easily. The only way to avoid that basically is to try and keep it in round shapes, as I mentioned, same with the MDF. But the good thing about this is it's so cheap, so easy to obtain. It does cut very easily. That was just a one pass. It is basically card with a bit of foam in the middle, and the foam in the middle is fine as a material. However, when it snaps, it like snaps instead of the foam will just snap. Whereas the rest of the material, like MDF, you're not going to, and to snap the E-PVC would be a great effort. I've just literally tried to bend that as much as I can. It's got a little bit of a bend, but you just bend it back. Foam board then, not a great material because it is prone to warping. Like with this, any kind of moisture, it's probably one of the more warpable materials. However, you can take the paper off and just use the foam, which is quite good for detailing. It is possible. I did a portal which had a nice circular base that basically used this. No warping issues whatsoever. I believe you can also use stuff like glue stick to possibly glue things together to avoid the warping. Now, one material that I didn't actually talk about is I sort of spoke about the foam in the middle here. Blue foam, the extruded polystyrene, is actually okay as a basic material. It is prone to a little bit like cracking and snapping instead of just degrading over time. If you buy 6mm, it'll snap very easily. If the thicker you go, the less you'll have to blend in. But the actual foam inside, if you can just get it, is sort of an okay material, but I personally wouldn't recommend it. The next one I do sort of recommend, personally, is this vinyl tile. And there's a gentleman on YouTube called Redbeard Baron who swears by this stuff essentially, and I can understand why. It is of course very flexible. So, well, I mean, it's very, very flexible, which means obviously if you are going to put some terrain on it that's heavy and you pick it up, like imagine that was a building and I picked it up, well, it's got a crack, it's very flexible, but that's not really like what it's for. Of course, if it was just this circular shape, it would be okay. It's got advantages in that it's very, very, very thin, which is a good thing, because what it basically means is that your terrain will be very close to the ground and there'll not be a lip, so you won't need to bevel it or anything like that. It'll just be so thin. I'll just very quickly, you can actually just cut this very easily. Pair of scissors, I do apologise for the sound, but pair of scissors you can just cut off. You can cut it off very, very easily. If you are going to use this stuff, it does come sticky on one side, so what I would personally do is actually use that to put my glue on, and then maybe just let that slide around. However, you could, if you want, just put PVA glue on, let it dry, and then use this side. If you use the shiny side, obviously the issue there is that it's going to not adhere very well, because it's essentially plastic again, but it's like a very, very thin plastic, and you'll see there it is prone to snapping as well. Once it bends too much, once you go past its estimated level, well, I'm saying that, it's not bended, there we go, it just sort of snaps like that. However, it's very, very cheap to get sometimes. In the UK, for example, I got 3 of these tiles, which are basically a foot by a foot. It's so big you can't actually see it on the camera. Let me zoom out there. Yeah, foot by a foot, I think these tiles are, and these were 3 for £1. So you can't, like, there's no cheaper option really than this. If you go more specialist than that, there are more expensive tiles, but I just personally wouldn't use them as basic materials. The good thing about this is that you could cut out discs out of them. You could have imagine you wanted an area, you could flock it, and then you could have your trees on discs made out of it, and it'd be very, very cheap. If this is the only thing you can get, then it's actually not bad. It won't warp, it's not going to warp at all because it's all plastic. The only downside to it is that it is a little bit fragile and bendy, but that's not necessarily a bad thing, depending on what you do with it. If you put something very heavy on it though, and you've got a lip to your terrain, then of course when you pick it up, it's gonna have that strong like bend. But vinyl tile, an actually okay, decently cheap option if it's the only thing you've got. So that's the end of the discussion on basing materials. Hopefully I've gone through enough why I think that E-PVC, this extruded, I'm not sure why it stands for, extruded PVC, often called Foamex, is the best material. Essentially, you can cut it easily, it's not gonna warp. The only downside to it is that it's a little bit expensive and it can be a little bit hydrophobic, as in your PVA might not have a nice even spread. It might want to like ball up into like globs of water, right, or globs of PVA, and instead of spreading evenly. Not a massive issue. I've not had any issues with peeling after that. And just quickly to talk about cost, well, we'll go through the other materials as well. MDF, very awkward to cut with a blade instead of a saw, something like that. However, it is reasonably cheap. If you go thicker than 3mm, you're really going to struggle, I think, to cut it with a knife. You would definitely need a saw. If you've got power tools, fine, it's more than fine to use that. There's chipboard, there's what's it called? Not MDF. Oh, I can't remember what it's called. It's chipboard, but I'm not sure, there's another name for it in the US. But basically, there's different kinds of wood. Generally, they're all going to be the same. You can maybe do it with this really like serrated steak knife, but I think if you're just looking for a little small piece at your desk or what have you, then E-PVC is the best. Vinyl tile's pretty good. Redbeard Baron does a lot of his terrain on the vinyl tile. Like I said, it's not something you'd want to put a huge building on, but then do you really need to put a building on any kind of piece of board, any base? Maybe not. What was the other material? Foam board is okay if it's the last thing you've got. You could obviously use card if that really is the last thing you've got. Foam board though is very easily available, very cheap as well. Keep in mind that it is a little bit prone to warping, but if you do it in circles, you're not really going to have a massive problem there. You can just use like blue foam if you've got it thin enough, but then it is a little bit prone to snapping and can be a bit expensive. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all the ones that I covered. Let's talk about cost, and let me show you where I got this from. This is A3 size Foamex. I bought this on eBay. I'll try and find links for like Amazon and affiliate links and all that stuff. If it is an affiliate link, I do get a kickback, so just be aware of that. But really, I bought 5 of this for £15, and that'll, if I wasn't making a terrain channel, that would do me for a significant amount of time. But I could get 3 ponds out of that, many sets of rivers, all different kinds of stuff you could make just using £15 worth of this stuff. If you're going to build like lots and lots of terrain and you've got access to a saw, yeah, pop out the MDF, it's good value. But this, just for the ease of use, like I think this is actually free shipping. I could have got one of these for about £3. If you want to start small, there you go, buy one of them and you'll only pay like £3, which is, let's just double check that. Oh no, this is a pack size of 5. They don't have pack sizes of 1, but you know what I mean. You can buy them reasonably cheaply in the right places, and I will try and put links available. It is my favorite material. I crack on about it all the time, and in the future when I reference basing materials, I'm probably going to reference this video. Well, that's it about basing materials. I hope you found this video vaguely useful. It was just one of those videos I felt like I needed to make to just get it out of the way. Why I like this material, its pros, its cons, all the other pros and cons of other materials and that kind of stuff. You know, I know like Wylock uses the chipboard, which is very thin, a bit prone to warping, not really my style. Some people won't even bother with bases if you can avoid it. You know, it's each to your preference. I personally like not to put my terrain on bases unless I absolutely have to. But you know, each to their own. If you're going to put massive stuff on it, then yeah, the thicker you go, the less warping, chance of warping, but then the less blended it does into the table. So it's completely your call. MDF is cheap, Foamex bit expensive. You know, I went through them all. It's up to you. Have a most beautiful day. Like and subscribe, and goodbye.